One thing I do want to do tonight, which if Finney wants to hear it, they'll probably have to toss on your headphones, because I actually want to play a video for y'all. And I want to... So one thing that some political commentators do is they, watch contemporary pundits and such, and a lot of times that's just to dunk on them. I kind of want to go a different direction with this, with Twitch. There's a lot of the things that we're seeing, especially insofar as like racial injustice, is stuff that has not moved since the civil rights era at all. So I was familiar very well with Malcolm X's writings. I was familiar very well with Martin Luther King's writings and both of their speeches. I've come across another speaker at the time and writer at the time, James Baldwin. And I kind of wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to him and his works. I had never heard the name before. And having listened now to several of his speeches and interviews, I am kind of ashamed of that, because he was a very, very powerful speaker. Very, very sharp guy who really got to the heart of what a lot of this was. And one of the interviews in particular that I want to go over and pause as we're going through to talk about the points kind of line by line is when he was on the Dick Cavett show. What I find really interesting about this interview is it's an interview that could happen today between some white political pundit and, a liberal one, and a Black Lives Matter activist. Like, the things that are talked about and the framing of the question and the struggle of understanding is so paralleled to exactly what we're seeing today. That's kind of jarring. It's jarring that just so little progress has actually been made. So let me shift things over and we'll get that going. Also pause the music, if y'all will indulge me. So desktop, there we go. Okay, so this is James Baldwin talking to Dick Cavett on the Dick Cavett show.
Near me. Mr. Baldwin, I'm sure you still meet the remark that, what are the Negroes, why aren't they optimistic? And I apologize and preface this by the phrase, the Negroes, because it lumps together an awful lot of people. You and Floyd McKissick and Madam Clayton Powell and Hattie McDaniel and Jackie Robinson, and it's impossible, I suppose, but for want of a better phrase, if you'll allow me, they say, but it's getting so much better. There are Negro mayors. There's Negroes in all of sports. There are Negroes in politics. They're even accorded the ultimate accolade of being in television commercials now.
So, just starting off, this framing of this question, this is a question that we hear. It's black people we just had a black president. Why are people still upset? Why are there still claims of inequality? Why is there still anger? It's the same question that you hear today, is why is there still malcontent despite opportunity existing? And yeah, James has a very solid answer to that, but I wanted to emphasize that point there. Yeah, exactly. Why are you have some nice things. Why are you still complaining?
I'm glad you're smiling. Is it at once getting much better and still hopeless?
Well, I don't think there's much hope for it, to tell you the truth. As long as people are using this peculiar language. It's what I was trying to convey before when I said that it's not a question of what happens to the Negro here, or to the black man here. That's a very vivid question for me, But the real question is what's going to happen to this country. I have to repeat that. Now, if Negroes, don't seem to be very optimistic, it's not because they suddenly all changed from happy, shiftless, dancing darkies down on the levee, picking all that cotton and singing praises to the master. They've not changed at all. They never were optimistic. All one's got to do is listen to Swing Low, Sweet Chariot and ask yourself what that song's about. Or try to really listen to what Ray Charles is really telling you.
The references he pulls here are ones I was, I guess, academically aware of, but I never really focused on it, honestly, until I watched this interview. And I spent probably an hour digging into some of these things. So, like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot is one of many, many examples of this gospel style music, which is strongly associated with African Americans. The underlying mood and theme constantly is just this kind of dejection of current conditions of living and the shift towards, and the hope towards a better afterlife. And Swing Low, Sweet Chariot is exactly that. I'm looking forward to going home. In this case, home being heaven, not where they live. There's this lack of ownership of a real home felt. Hey, El Pepe, welcome aboard. Glad to have you. And Ray Charles, a lot of his music, of course, touches on that same life experience. Pulling in pop culture is an effective way of conveyance, especially if you don't really look at it except as songs that are just kind of something you passively enjoy. But music is a reflection of a culture and of the people that created that music. And if the tone of that music is a kind of hopelessness, a kind of dejection, and a hope for a better afterlife because the life here sucks, that's a reflection of the culture that developed it and the conditions that they lived in. It's not just because of just trying to make good music. It does say something very potent there.
We have lived under these intolerable conditions for how many years? Nearly 400 years. We have evolved a certain kind of style to meet it, and a lot of that has been involved with the lies we had to tell to you, and the lies we had to tell to you, this compounds the disaster you believed because you wanted to believe it. But obviously you knew, every white man knows, that he would not himself, lying track for nothing. He would not himself allow his child to be sold from him as though the child were a mule. He would not himself allow himself not to have the autonomy of his own house and his own woman. He would not himself pick all that cotton and carry it to market just because he loved white people.
And here's kind of this, and apologies for just constantly pausing, but there's a lot to unpack, and he's saying it very succinctly. That cultural centuries of lying for the sake of self-preservation. A touch of old school sexism there. I mean, But just having to play as if you are content with your station in life for 400 years, for multiple generations, and to put on that smile and to go and work the field every day or what have you, whatever your lot in life is, that he's right. That would leave a very deep scar in a people, and it is something that white people here, because we are majority, there is no one who would accept those conditions, and it kind of draws this contrast of you don't have a frame of reference to actually understand and put your mind in the mindset of this like deeply ingrained dishonesty that was a product of self-preservation and that in some ways had to be internalized just to survive.
We all know that. And the word Negro in this country really is designed finally to disguise the fact that one is talking about another man, a man like you, who wants what you want. And insofar as the American Republic wants to think there has been progress, they overlook one very simple thing. I don't want to be given anything by you. I just want you to leave me alone so I can do it myself. And it also overlooks another very important thing. Perhaps I don't think that this republic is the summit of human civilization. Perhaps I don't want to become like Ronald Reagan or like the president of General Motors. Perhaps I have another sense of life, which in fact my situation here has forced me to trust. And perhaps I know more about you and your institutions than you know about me. And perhaps I have a judgment on them. Perhaps I don't want what you think I want. And if there's nothing you can give me, perhaps there is something that I can give you.
That was actually a really interesting framing, and again, this is still a blind spot that I struggle with, because like I have in my head kind of what kind of life I would want, and the kind of idyllic life for me, and that's kind of a shared experience I find between a lot of white people, and it is very easy as kind of a majority in a country to expect that everyone kind of fits into that same mold, kind of has the same values, etc. Obviously, we're seeing a breakdown of a lot of those values between, white supremacists and anti-racists at the moment. But it is kind of illuminating to hear it spelled out so plainly, just a straight calling out as you don't know what you're talking about. And it's kind of reminiscent of, needing to just kind of stop trying to solve the problem by elevating people to what we think the solution should be, and more shut up and listen. Like, just all we want is want to be left alone, want to live our lives, not be subjugated, not be tampered with, not be targeted by police, not be kept out of certain opportunities, not be held down. Just get out of the way, let us live our lives. In that respect, it is very similar to what most people want, but at the same time, that's not actually how the problem gets discussed, especially among white people, because it's always, well, what can we give you to solve the problem? And that's not really the question that needs to be asked. The real question really is, what can we stop doing to let you live freely in this country, you know? What are we doing still to meddle and to keep things unbalanced and to prevent your progress? So it's an interesting framing. I liked that.
Where do you stand in relation to the Negro figures in the media that we see who frighten us the most, and maybe some of you the most?
This is the violence
ones
question.
who want to burn it down, demolish it. The
Yeah,
ones
yeah.
who have totally given up. I assume you haven't totally given up.
Well, I'm still alive. There's still breath in me. And so as long as breath is in me, I will never give up. But if you think that Rap Brown, you're referring to rap really, and Stokely, are something new, I refer you back to an old song. No one even knows who wrote it. And it's supposed to be spiritual. It's supposed to be about, Christian church, but it really is a slave revolt song. The man says, if I had my way, little children, great God, if I had my way, I'd tear this building down. It is not new for me. We've always felt that. It is new for you. And if we were white, if we were Irish, if we were Jewish, if we were Poles, if we had, in fact, in your mind, a frame of reference, our heroes would be your heroes too. Nat Turner would be a hero for you instead of a threat. Malcolm X might still be alive. It is that you can face, in some ways, the discontent of white people when they rise, they are heroes. And everyone is very proud of brave little Israel, a state against which I have nothing. I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm not an anti-Semite. But when the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
Apologies for the slur, but it's that. This is very true, though. This is very, very true, and it's something that we are actively seeing play out in response to protests. What you do see this sort of exact same thing when white supremacists or whatever raise arms and say, yeah, freedom. What is the response from a lot of people is sympathy. They're not treated as criminals. The plot against the Michigan governor was, but that crossed a line. But it is very true that when white people arm up and make demands and call out the government for injustice, they are lauded much more widely as heroes, as heroic figures, and raised up and defended, not just by white supremacists, but also by liberals in large part. And you really don't see that same unity when, say, Black Lives Matter. Like, if you look at the protests and the reaction, there's this whole, oh, they shouldn't be so violent, there shouldn't be rioting and all this stuff. But all of that violence, all it is really is exactly that cry: give us liberty or give us death. And the answer that we give white people is usually finding a way to give them liberty, to give justice. And the answer that we give to people of color is, okay, we'll give you death. It is a distinction, and it is based on skin color, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Second Amendment evangelism never seems to apply to black people defending themselves. Absolutely true. And as a caveat, this is just my, I'm just kind of interpreting what I can from this interview. It could be a very incomplete, or there could be inaccuracies. Feel free to call me out if you think that I'm out of line on this stuff. But I'm trying to listen, and I'm trying to listen to voices from the past as well, because they seem to be very relevant today. That's kind of why we're going here, because the needle hasn't moved. This is 1959 or 69, somewhere in there, and the needle really hasn't moved.
Now, you can do this if you like, until your party is over. But I know, after all, who my heroes are. And George Washington is not one of my heroes, for example. Neither is Booker T. Washington. What the American public has always tried to do is to accommodate me into a system which is always meant my death. They want me to become an accomplice to my own murder. That is what you really mean by integration.
That's impressive. I didn't understand it. That last sentence.
Stokely Carmichael says, and he's quite right, that integration is a euphemism for white supremacy. The truth is that we have been integrated here since we got here. That is not what the battle is at all. If Negroes in this country arrange from every color under heaven, from yours to mine, to people even blacker than me, that gives away the history and tells us what happened. Or as an old black woman once put it to me, to sum it up, she said, white people don't hate black people. If they did, we'd all be black.
This is a line of thinking, again, that I had never considered, and it makes sense in retrospect. This notion of what integration actually means. After hearing this, I really sat down and scratched my head and tried to puzzle every time that I hear the integration argument. And this is actually not just towards black people, but any immigrants. It's those people won't integrate, or they have trouble integrating, or it's expensive to integrate them. And the question that kept rolling around in my head is, what does integration mean? How is it defined? How is it measured? What is the metric by which you can say this individual is integrated? And I think that he really hits on something very, very accurate here, which is integration really does kind of boil down to someone who has utterly forfeited their identity and is basically just willing to keep their head down and accept the conditions that they are going to live in here. Not someone who's going to ask for more, not someone who actually wants to be treated equally, but someone who is passive and keeps to the shadows, is willing to contribute to the GDP, but otherwise stays out of sight and out of mind. Those who champion that people need to integrate, they don't really present what that means, and they aren't actually willing to support measures like more policy-driven desegregation of neighborhoods and schools and things of that nature, because they like that segregation, and to them integration basically means becoming a cog in something that supports the country but ultimately is at the mercy of the system. negative peace, which is the absence of tension, versus a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Exactly. Exactly, Castor. Welcome. Now take your pre-selected place in the hierarchy and quietly, please. That is exactly what it's the only answer that I can come up with, because if people actually genuinely meant becoming equal partners in this country, those who called for integration would actually be looking for equal justice and desegregation of our neighborhoods and our schools, and less discrimination in workplaces and such. Like that's what actual like societal integration should look like, is becoming equal partners. But instead they're seeing it more as being an integral part of the machinery that already exists, rather than integral to society itself. And if the machinery that exists is one that inflicts violence and prejudice against people of color, he is entirely correct that calling for integration is asking for complicity in one's own murder. It's a very cynical ask that people make. Hey, welcome to Space. We are going through a interview from James Baldwin and kind of examining how it still applies today. Yeah, Baldwin was absolutely the man. But an illustrative one. A lot of people can understand. Yeah. The way champions are treated in Hungary. That's, yeah. Exactly. It's an incomplete example, but it's a fair one, and it's a useful one insofar as drawing on pop culture. So, yeah, we're continuing along.
That's something you got to face. I mean, you, the American Republic. We are your brothers, and you're disowned brothers and sons and sisters and daughters. You got to face that.
There's a sense in which I don't think you answered my question, and we will
doubt.
be back in a moment. Stay with us. Mr. Baldwin.
Yeah, Custer. I know that he traveled quite a bit, and he did spend a fair bit of time in Britain and France and other countries. There was a very, very good interview, an hour long, with William Buckley that was hosted in the UK. And that was a very good interview, but it's just too long to dissect on stream. Very good speech on it, though. And that's linked in the Discord, too, so...
Well, and I guess what I meant by not answering my question was this. You get a kind of simple idea of what Stokely, Carmichael, and H. Rat Brown mean, and it's maybe because we may not read their words in complete form, but we see them for a minute on the news, and they're yelling, get guns, burn, so forth. And all I was asking really was, are you more moderate than that in your present mood?
This is a very common question that we keep hearing in the media today, and keep hearing from especially white political pundits today, is are you one of the good ones, basically? Will you condemn the other Black Lives Matter people who are getting too uppity, right? Like, this is such an echo. It's chilling how little we've learned.
And are they saying too much? Are they over making a point?
Well, the point that they're trying to make cannot be overstated. I'm much older than Rapp, and I'm much older than Stokely. And to that extent, I can be called more moderate, I suppose. But on the other hand, the difficulty here is this. I can't, Martin Luther King said this too in another way. I can't really ask a black boy younger than, let's say, 20 years old, all right? 17 years old, 25 years old. There are two things I can't ask him to do. I can't ask him to allow himself to live on the terms bequeathed him by the American white people of this country. I cannot ask him to allow the forces which rule this country to emasculate him. I cannot do that. I won't do that. I don't, on the other hand, want to, will not either, counsel a generation, to go out into the streets to die. But there is nothing in the evidence offered by the book of the American Republic which allows me really to argue with a cat who says to me, they needed us to pick the cotton, and now they don't need us anymore. And now they don't need us, they're going to kill us all off, just like they did the Indians. And I can't say it's a Christian nation. Your brothers will never do that to you because the record is too long and too bloody. That's all we have done. All your buried corpses now begin to speak. I can't depend on the American moral credit to save some of the people whom I love, because you don't have that moral credit. You told yourself, yourselves, and us for all these years nothing but lies. Now, I want you to understand something. I'm not interested in making an accusation. I'm not even talking about the past. I'm talking about the present. This is not an accusation. It is a plea for the life of this country. Because no matter what I say, no matter what Martin said, the despair in the ghetto, the despair throughout the country accumulates with every hour. And people grow up much faster than you think they do. People are uptight about Stokely now because he said black power. No one is concerned about white power, which is now wiping out Southeast Asia. No one's concerned about...
I'm going to pause it there again. So, yeah, he's again entirely correct and frames it in a very poignant way. This is he threads this needle very, very carefully and very sympathetically of saying, no, I'm not going to condemn people who are, taking up arms and retaliating because they have been subjected to this system. They are being subjugated. There is state violence still being inflicted upon them as unto their ancestors and on unto their ancestors. But he also makes it very clear that it is not just about retaliation, that it's not about things that were done in the past. It is still going on. And I think that's perfectly fair. If we are, as a nation, unwilling to actually meet and resolve the grievances, if we are unwilling to actually listen and correct the conditions that drive people to violence, they will be driven to violence. That is the only inevitable answer. Or, as he rightly points out, the other potential answer is genocide. Those are the only two possibilities. It's a sad reality, but it's one that has to. It's a point that has to keep getting made. Keep being made over and over and over again, because there's this unrealistic notion especially among white people, that violence, is completely unnecessary here. And if they just asked nicely and went through the political process, everything would be better. But as we've discussed on this channel, it's not better. And as we're looking at, this is stuff that they were talking about decades ago, and of course, centuries before that. But we have it on record, on recording, these very same sorts of things being discussed decades ago, and they haven't been solved. And we've had a bit of, passivity, and we've had some peace in the meantime. But with the upswing and uptick of not only police violence, but awareness of police violence with recording it and such, yeah, there's a renewed anger and a renewed awareness that this is still going on. So, yeah, anyway, sorry. Let's continue on. Yeah, the goal absolutely keeps getting pushed back. And in large part, many people in power don't want the solution. They don't want to share equality. A lot of people still view it as a zero-sum game, wherein the people that look like them would somehow lose if they shared equal power with people who don't. It's a very, very small way of looking at the world, because it doesn't actually work that way. I don't know. It's mystifying to me. Like, if you look at even just the United States as a model, if you looked at it as zero-sum game, there should be no reason for us to have cooperative states, because somehow we would lose out by being neighbors to other states. We should all be vying for power and, fighting our own fight. But we recognize that we are actually stronger together when all parties are, doing the best they can. Now, that's arguable that isn't really working out so well right now, but I think the parable kind of holds if you grant it a little bit of leeway. We're also taught to only see certain types of violence. If poverty is violence inflicted on the poor, yeah. We don't think of it that way. We can't imagine that violence in response might be justified. That's entirely true. That is entirely true, yeah. That systemic poverty, that over-policing, that over-policing is a really insidious one too, because you can try and get people more sympathetic towards poverty, but the moment cops are introduced, people are like, oh, well, he must have committed some crime. And that's not really the right question, because as we see, incarceration rates are just massively tilted one way. The number of police patrols are just, they're way out of proportion against black people in black neighborhoods, which are, again, kept as black neighborhoods because of segregation policy. Even if did commit a crime, yeah, we conveniently forget that it's not police's job. Exactly. Their job at most is to make an arrest, not to execute or beat people. Extrajudicial murder is one of the most flagrant abuses because, like, our entire system of law relies on people having fair trial. And if you prematurely take someone's life, they cannot have that trial. They cannot be viewed by their peers and the evidence weighed. And that, again, way disproportionately is aimed at black people, and people of color. Now, it is, in fairness, it is aimed at white people, and that is equally problematic. Well, not equally, but it is problematic as well. Cops shouldn't be killing people, period. Should never happen, except in the most extreme circumstances. We develop all these non-lethal techniques and things for what purpose, except to save lives, but they're not actually used. Ooh, not okay. Yeah, poverty is not... Yes. Systemic poverty is definitely a deliberate action that keeps on going, and it's getting worse. And I think that this is something that I think we've talked about a little bit. I think part of the reason why a lot more white people are sympathizing with, like, the Black Lives Matter movement and are also joining in some of these protests is where we are no longer actually benefiting from the system enough to be complicit in it, at least not on the same scale. And that is a very cynical way of looking at it, I realize, but I do believe that. We're starting to feel the pinch of some of the poverty and some of the over-policing. We're starting to feel some of that inequality ourselves. So it's a lot easier to sympathize with those who have dealt with it for centuries. Again, very cynical view, but I think there is truth to it. All right, I'm going to continue him on.
The white power which keeps my children in the ghetto, which does not educate my children except to become inferiors. This is power. And when the Republic reacts as it did to the linking of the two words power and black, it is a confession of what the country has done with its power.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought that there might be a basis for prejudice against Negroes specifically that is maybe deeper than anything anybody has said yet? I don't mean that I'm about to say it, but I mean by this, is it possible that you always have to deal with the prejudice against Negroes separately from almost all other racial prejudices? And has anyone ever offered a theory that it's something unrational, something sub-rational, some almost tribal, irreducible fear of the color black or something that may put that kind of prejudice into another category?
A great many people have suggested that, but I'm not sure that I entirely buy that. I'm not, I was lucky enough or desperate enough to live outside this country for a while. And I observed, that if I walk down the streets of Paris or Stockholm or Istanbul with, Phyllis, for example, nobody even noticed it. The only people who really get uptight when they see a black boy walking with a white girl, for example, are Americans. And I've seen this a thousand times. I've seen it once. We're walking down the street, she and I, talking to each other, minding our own business. Or I'm walking down the street by myself, and here comes, somebody, with his girl. And something happens in his eyes, something happens in his face. I don't want his girl. I haven't even seen him. I don't care what they're doing. But something stiffens in him. Some trigger goes off in him.
Yeah, I hate the naturalist arguments as well, and I hear them crop up every now and then, usually by, race scientists. I think it's the latest branding for that or scientific racism or whatever it is that they're trying to peddle now. I am curious if is anyone in chat from out of country at the moment? Because I'm actually curious on something that he touches on here, which is that the very, very focused anti-black sentiment in particular is more unique to the United States. Hey, Brainless. So I'm posing that question out there. I realize that there is racism elsewhere, but I'm curious if that sort of very visceral reaction, especially to, mixed couples or what have you, is something that happens outside of the U.S. Is he accurate on this, or have things changed? Because I don't have a perspective. I've not gone abroad. You've seen a lot of racism down in Chile, but is it the same kind? Like, is it specifically like black, or is it just general xenophobia? Okay, there's been a lot of in the U.S. It's magnified by a large factor. Yeah, I understand that there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, and especially growing these days, there's the whole xenophobia is growing everywhere, but used to date a girl from South Africa, explaining that is the opposite. Is racism, yeah. We hear lots of issues with Aboriginals to a degree. Canadian Central America, yeah, race, color, national. White was lower class, yeah. And I mean, it does make sense that the whatever the majority is going to try. Like, I don't want to say that it makes sense like that's just the way it should be, but it does make sense that that's how the racism would manifest, if there is some. Yeah, Kester's correct. That's kind of more what I'm curious about is specifically what he's touching on is that a white man or a black man and a white woman, or inverse of that, if that specifically is seen as aberrant, or as pronouncedly aberrant outside of the United States. Because I understand racism does show up elsewhere. You've seen it in Denmark, Netherlands, UK, Germany. Okay. It is to a lesser extent, caveat. Okay. Yeah, and I realize this is just anecdotes. I like putting the question out there because I only have my perspective, and through all of you, we can kind of try and get a more complete picture. Jealousy is an instinct, but it telegraphs a message that others are a threat. Yeah, that's true. It says more about the jealous person than anyone else, for sure. Yeah, and that's a very, very strange kind of jealousy to me. I appreciate all of the answers, and it is disheartening how racism always kind of manifests in all different ways. That it's just some group always wants to keep others down, however they define others. There's always desire to keep a hierarchy. even if there's no real basis for it. Yeah. I appreciate all the answers very much.
I'm going to steal the girl. Well, it isn't because I'm black. It's because people pay for what they do. It's not because I want to steal his girl. He's uptight about me walking down the street, or uptight about Phyllis and me walking down the street. He's uptight because of some buried guilt. He knows what he's done. People always know. They pretend they don't, but they know. I don't want to rape, white women. But, I know how many of my women have been raped, and I know by whom, and so do you.
Hmm.
Now, in fact, I don't think anything in the black ferment, the black revolution, really involves revenge or is vindictive at all. It is the white imagination, the guilty white imagination, which makes this out of it, and it's this which paralyzed us in all our social activities. It's the reason no one knows anything about the labor unions, the schools, the situation of the people in the ghetto, nothing about the police, who are a very real menace to every black cat alive in this country. And no matter how many people say, you're being paranoid when you talk about police brutality, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, he just listed out all of the systemic areas where systemic racism comes out, and what he's about to launch into is a really good breakdown of systemic policing in general. And again, was completely chilling to me to listen to, because it's the same things that we're hearing today. Needle has not moved at all.
I survived those streets and those precinct basements. I know, and every black cat in this country knows, what the policeman is really like. And furthermore, I'll tell you this. I know what he was like when I was really helpless, how many beatings I got. And I know what happens now because I'm not really helpless, but I know, too, that if I haven't got the presence of mind, to do whatever I have to do, he doesn't know that this is Jimmy Baldwin and not just some other nigga. He's gonna blow my head off just like he blows off everybody else's head. And this is done with the will of the state, and this cannot be overstated. Mm-hmm. It can happen to my mother in the morning, to my sister, to my brother. It's only now beginning to be born on you since it's happening to your heroes. What has happened all these years to us? For me, this has always been a violent country. It has never been a democracy.
Right. I do get the feeling that you overstate for rhetorical purposes sometimes. And when you say the thing about the policeman, the simple phrase once come to my mind, but there are some good policemen, in the sense that you...
How many times do we hear this? Exactly those words. This is a few bad apples argument.
When you say, I could never vote for the Republicans as long as Nixon is in the party, or I could never vote for the Democrats as long as, who shall I say, Senator Eastland or...
Senator Eastland, for example.
But that leaves no door open. There's no hope then.
Door to what? Let me try to make it very clear. What I'm saying may be stated badly or awkwardly, but what I'm trying to say cannot be overstated. No tongue can overstate it. It takes you a long time in stammering to state it.
I agree. There's no eloquence equal to the race problem.
And of course, there are some good policemen.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I just think you risk being misunderstood by people who would be, pardon the expression, sympathetic by what sounds like too broad a statement.
But you must understand that part of what is happening here is a tremendous gap between my experience of life, I'm using myself as a black man, right? And your experience of life, you as a white man, okay? Right. And you say sympathetic, for example. But you overlook, I hate to put it this way, this may sound like an overstatement too, that I, historically speaking, have lived here with your sympathy, for a very long time. It may have occurred to me now that if I could live with your sympathy as long as I have, I can possibly live without it. I mean, I want your sympathy anymore, maybe I can't afford it anymore. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about individual policemen, and no doubt Nixon loves his children. I'm talking about the structure for which these people work. Yes. Policemen in the ghetto are not there, no matter what liberal newspapers may say, are not there to protect my life. They're there to protect your property.
Yes.
Stay with us. Stay with us. We'll be back after this message.
that's all of this interview I was able to find, but that is the argument that we are hearing today over and over again regarding the police. And we're hearing the same arguments that James Baldwin here is making, that it doesn't matter what's in an individual officer's heart of hearts. That doesn't matter. The structure that they are working in, the incentives, the structure, what they are actually accomplishing, the effect of it is not actually justice. Let's switch over here. That's the end of that. Right. Maybe if you were more polite and less angry with your slogans argument. Exactly. And it nothing has been learned. It's been several decades since exactly that interview.